My name is Trina, and this is our class on, hold on, because I have to remember which one. I also do one on shadow work, on why boundaries are important for the empath. I actually, in reference with my partner, refer to this as the codependency class, because that is the trap of being an empath. And this is why boundaries are important, but we are very prone to giving of ourselves because we don't want to feel that negative energy, that in the process we give away a lot of ourselves. But I'm going to start with my story. 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, because it was August, I was 340 pounds. I was in an unhappy relationship. At the time I would have categorized it as abusive. Now, through my own shadow work, I have realized he was dealing with his own traumas, his own shadows. He wasn't making my life hell because he wanted to. He was making my life hell because he was making his own life hell, and I was going along for the ride, particularly as an unhealed empath and being codependent. That is how I identified everything that was happening. COVID actually is, funny enough, what saved my life. I had MS, trigeminal neuralgia, fibromyalgia, PCOS, and a whole lot of other little things, but those were the big ones. And what that was my body beating itself up, because I had given so much of myself, had no identity of my own anymore. And that's why I'm teaching this class. But when COVID struck, my doctor said, don't go outside because you're on an immunosuppressant. It would not be good for you. And that was the first time in 8 to 10 years I told myself, oh my God, I want to live. And I feel that that is when I manifested the partner I'm with now. Because we started speaking, I was not looking for anyone, even though it was not a good relationship with my husband. I expected to die there. I had no plans to leave or do anything differently until I met someone on a video game, Star Wars: The Old Republic, and we connected. And when we started our first conversation, real conversation, he was intelligent, deep, and spiritual. And I had let my spiritual side go. I had been a Wiccan priestess for 15 years. You know, this was something that was a part of my life. My dad was pagan, it's how I was raised. But I had completely let it go because in the process of not staying true to my boundaries, of not even knowing what boundaries or codependency was, I had completely lost any sense of self until that call of spirit connected and my growth started. Now this past December 19th, I started channeling dimensional beings who led me through working with shadow work, how I could heal. And I did in spectacular fashion. If you know anything about MS, there's lesions in the brain. I had it brain and spine. They're gone. My MRI is clean. This is no longer a part of my life, and it is the spiritual path that helped that happen. But shadow work was my forte. I will walk in the darkness with anybody who needs it. But it's amazing how much months later of doing constant shadow work, something will still come up. And codependency was the one that came up for me. I was able to look back, and no matter how in touch I was, I thought, with my higher self, I wasn't being who I was. I was still giving so much of my own identity to the relationship, me and my partner, instead of becoming my own autonomous sovereign being. And the way this is the trap, and I'll get for the empath, is we want harmony above all else. We feel when someone is upset, and it tears at us, especially if we don't know what we did wrong. But the thing is you never do anything wrong. You might think you did something wrong because from their perspective, maybe they thought it was, but it's usually, actually what am I saying, it's always their problem. Just like when we're upset at somebody, it's always our problem, not theirs. And that is how boundaries work. Your boundary can only be something that you will not accept and have a consequence for. An example was there was a couple we were working with because we do divine union counseling and such. And she said, because he had had a history of cheating, I don't want you walking around without a shirt on. That wasn't a boundary. She was trying to control what he did. A boundary would have been, if you walk around without your shirt, I'm not walking around with you. I don't want to be seen then with you. And when you set a boundary, it is vital that it is something you're willing to follow through on. Because, if you go, well, if you're late again, I'm leaving you, and you're not really gonna leave if they're late again, that's not a boundary either. So your boundaries can't control someone else being sovereign, but they can say what you will and won't put up with and take into yourself. And that is, after shadow work, really, I think, one of the most vital parts of healing. Because we will work with people and keep giving of ourselves and giving of ourselves, but not taking care of ourselves. Because it's always about, the example I really like to use is a wife will go to herself, I'm in the mood for chocolate cake. So she'll turn to her husband and say, I'm in the mood for cake. Okay, let's go to the bakery. Go to the bakery. As soon as he walks in, he goes, wow, that's a beautiful carrot cake. What does the empath do? And I'm using the feminine in this, not because women are more likely to be empathic, we're more likely to be intuitive and listen to it. I believe no matter whether you're an integrator or an intuitive, you can be empathic. Women are just more likely to listen, usually. So we're more likely to fall into the codependency trap. You sit there and you go, well, he wants carrot cake. It's still cake, I'm good with that, let's get a carrot cake. The thing is he never knew. He never had a chance to even make a decision that might have made you happy. But we feel like we gave because we sacrificed that chocolate cake we had in our mind. Divine Male wasn't asking you to sacrifice, but we do it. And then we build resentments because how many things did I give up because someone else wanted something else? But without a boundary, without figuring out what you actually want, separate from the other person. And that's a big part too, because I would sit there and go, well, I really want what they want. But it turns out I didn't. Once I freed myself to be able to make my own choices without taking someone else's preferences into account, I found out I didn't always want that. My ex used to listen to really heavy metal. I liked heavy metal. I had evolved and changed into a point where that wasn't speaking to me the way it used to, but I didn't know that until after I left him. And then I still didn't know that until I realized the trap of codependency, and that then it was the music my new partner listened to that suddenly was speaking to me. And I had to find out, what do I actually like when you take everybody else out of the equation? And when you can remember who you are, what really speaks to you, you can start to make boundaries. This is actually part of my shadow work class, but I feel it's useful for this, is when you catch yourself following what someone else wants or getting upset with them because it's chafing you. The example I use is for the mirror trick. If your mom says, I need you to do something, and that's a really inconvenient time, a boundary would be to say, this is a really inconvenient time, either would this work better, find some other way to do it, whatever you are willing to do with it. But the mirror trick, and the reason I'm throwing this in here is it's just so useful for everybody, is to go, I'm angry because my mom doesn't respect my time. And then take the other person out of it, because it is never the other person. You say to yourself, I don't respect my time. Mm-hmm. Well, I know it feels like it's coming from your mother, but if you respected your own time, you would speak up and say, that's not a good time for me. And so if you can't speak up and say that's not a good time for me, then that's something you need to work on to separate your codependency from your relationship with her. Because there's obviously some reason that you don't feel you are a sovereign and autonomous being that can speak up and say, that's not a good time for me. And those are the signs of codependency. When you can't speak your truth, speak where you're chafing because you don't want to upset the other person, you've given your own power away. And it is a very important part of boundary setting. Again, the things that I want to go through with it in how to boundary set. Decide the things that don't serve you. And instead of tossing them away violently, because that never works well, thank them for being in your life and gently release them. But say, I'm not going to put up with that anymore. Now, you can't change someone else's actions, ever. I used to think I could change the ex, because he was a good guy inside with a lot of traumas. It was never up to me. It was always up to him. But a boundary would have been, I'm not going to take in the anger you're putting out. So I'm going to walk away. If you chase me, I will leave. Those would have been boundaries. Because it's not changing what he does, but it's showing what the repercussions that you are willing to stand by in order to stay true to yourself. The other thing that you have to do with boundaries is whatever your repercussions are, have it be something you're willing to follow through with. Because when we are in that unhealed empath state, where you're more likely to give way too much of yourself, you also are more likely then, as you're trying to form your boundaries, overdo them. If you don't learn to chew with your mouth closed, I'm getting a divorce. Are you really going to get a divorce if they, keep chewing with their mouth open? You might, and in which case, then that's your boundary. But for most people, you have to make sure that your reaction and your boundary setting sets an expectation, and then you'll follow through with it. This actually goes with children. This is why the codependency lesson was so vital for me, actually, is because of my tendency to it. I was way too lenient on my children. Drove my current partner crazy to no end because they also were wounded from a very angry household where I had left. And so I just still was in that protective mama bear mode. And I would do everything to stop them from being unhappy. I didn't want to feel their unhappiness. What I have realized, and this is truly the gift for the empath, once you learn your boundaries, it's actually better for the people you're putting the boundaries on. They may not feel it, because again, if someone benefited from you not having boundaries, they're not going to be happy when you start to set them, because they benefited from you not having boundaries. And yet, it helps them heal. It helps them learn, this is how I can interact with you to have the fullest, best relationship. Because I was codependent with my children, I wouldn't push them for things they needed to do to learn life skills, to become adults. My oldest is 19. And I'm now trying to undo the damage. But again, forgive myself for it, because I couldn't have known then what I know now. Which is also a big part when you go through all this, is never beat yourself up for having been codependent. Because a third grader can't know what a high schooler does. You're a high schooler now. And when you realize that you're doing it, you're able to do that. But those boundaries will teach them how to navigate in the world, how to respect other people, and then with their own boundaries, how to stay true to themselves. Setting boundaries with my ex would have helped him grow sooner than the growth he has had since I left. Because by putting that out there, people are only working from their own place, their own level. And that is going to very often trample on people who don't speak up. Not because the other person wants to trample you, but because you're not telling them where the lines are. So they're running all over our internal personal boundaries. But if you don't speak them, you just constantly feel like you're being a victim without ever giving the person a chance to not make you a victim. And then there's nothing you can really do about that. There's 3 stages of empath that I like to talk about. The first is the unhealed empath. This is the state that most of us are in until we consciously start working through our shadows, how to harness and trust our inner voice and our higher intuition. And it's called the unhealed empath because we don't know where it's coming from. We just know that that doesn't feel right. And because we haven't learned to see it what it is, guidance from the universe, guidance from big us that is down there guiding little us around. If we listen, the messages are there. But because the messages often conflict with what consensus reality, the matrix, whatever you want to refer it to, is telling us, we don't trust it. And when we don't trust it, we end up in a wounded state. We see fear everywhere. We end up with the victim paradigm. Then you have healed empath. You're doing your shadow work. You're working on it. You're learning to quiet that ruminating mind and reach to find out what the universe is telling us. And the third, although seen unpopularly lumped with empaths, has at least, because it's always your miracles may vary, in my experience, is a narcissist. Narcissists are empaths. They are. They've just been so injured by their own traumas, by upbringing that never taught them boundaries, that anybody else had boundaries. that they hurt other people. They use their empathic way of reading other people to give themselves the validation that they desperately crave over and over to feel whatever that wounding is inside you. Narcissists can be healed too, and they are a part of being empathic. In fact, and here's the thing to forgive yourself for, many empaths have gone through a narcissistic phase. We've healed enough to come out of it, but we look back and go, oh my God, I was really a villain for that person. And you can see that. Forgive yourself for that too, because those are all the stages that you have to go through to get there. But one of the best things that helped me with learning to set my boundaries was that I'm not hurting the person, I'm setting boundaries. Because you're not setting them against them, you're setting them for yourself. We build walls to protect that sensitive inner us. As an empath, you feel someone being upset. We build walls to keep that out so that we can shield, protect. Boundaries are a way of putting a door in there. You show people where the door is so they can meet you where you are ready to, where you are comfortable, and so that you can interact and help each other grow, heal, whatever your personal interaction with that person is for. Because everybody you encounter and interact with is there to help you grow on your journey, whether they're there to be a teacher, whether they're there to learn from you, whether they're there to stir up some of your shadows and trigger you. They're still always put into your universe for a reason. Having that door makes it so much easier to not feel overwhelmed because you get to choose how much, how you engage. Now, if someone's screaming in your face, it can be very hard to stay detached, but you can. Because as you heal your own triggers, your own shadows and wounds, you learn to set boundaries. You also learn to realize that everybody else's emotional responses are their autopilot, their reaction to traumas. It's not anything usually to do with you at all. One of the best quotes I saw for this was Eleanor Roosevelt. She said, you wouldn't worry about how other people think of you if you realize how rarely they do. Because everybody, we are focused on ourselves. Now, as an empath, you're focused on yourself, but feeling everything from everybody else. And you can work on that too without it overwhelming you by the boundaries. An example was not too long ago, my partner was going through some of his shadow work stuff, and he was in a bad mood. And I mean, he's great. He doesn't like yell or scream or take it out on me. As an empath, I still felt it. Oh my God, what did I do? How can I make him feel better? You know, how do I make this okay? Over the course of doing this last time that it happened, not that it's often, you know, once a month or so, he'll have shadow work that makes him need to take some time by himself to work through. I went, I know you're in a bad mood. I'm sorry you're in a bad mood, but I'm not taking it on me. And I was fine. Now, the benefit of having that boundary that I'm just not going to deal with it, you go by yourself or do whatever you need to do to get in a better mood or not, I'm good. He got through it in lightning time compared to what it normally takes. And I'm sure that's because I didn't need the lesson of taking and mirroring that into myself. Because, and this goes with codependency, how much when you give yourself, you read every little sign from someone. The way they're standing, they're mad at me. You know, I can't deal with thinking that this person is mad or sad because of something I did. Here's the thing, it never has anything to do with us. Even if it's something you did, it had nothing to do with you. Because they're upset, just like my ability to say to my partner, I'm not taking your upset on. They can do the same thing. And if they don't, they'll heal and be able to eventually. But that's still not your problem. Yours is only how you react. Now, this doesn't mean you run around and deliberately do things to be antagonistic to people. But honestly, if you're an empath, you're not doing that anyway. Because you don't like feeling it. But now stop taking it on ourselves. Someone else projects any emotion. We tend to take it in. We tend to say, how can I fix this and make this better? It's not ours to fix. It's theirs to fix. All we can do is love them. And I mean, genuinely love them. The example I'll use, my youngest is trans. This comes up in every one of my talks, actually, in some version of. So the whole world knows my youngest is trans. And I had a lot of issues with the political climate that makes their life more difficult. My mama bear is like, I want to protect my child. They're 15. But if I don't take in the attacks, the negativity that's out there, I can transmute it. I have seen it because I was putting the past world, voting, everything on the world. Because, right, that's what makes sense. Discernment tells you if this is the pattern it followed, it's the pattern it's going to continue to follow. But here's where it wasn't true. I was traveling with my partner and we were in rural Tennessee. And it was not a progressive looking area. And I thought, oh my goodness, if Damos was here, my youngest, this would be a place I would be afraid to let him go to the bathroom. And I went, why am I putting the past on what's going on now? So I walked into Dunkin' Donuts, because I needed my coffee, and there was a trans woman working the register, and everybody was joking with her, nobody seemed to care. And I realized when you let go of the preconceptions of the world will rise to meet you. Give out that love energy. Don't put negatives and past. Just let it be what it is, and you'll find out it's all love. All fear isn't real. It's all an illusion. And I know that's easier said than done to get to the point where you believe that. But it's true. And by giving the love and seeing the love, I was able to go into an area I would have considered scary because of its lack of being progressive. And instead, beautiful experience. The woman behind the counter was wonderful. And as I said, people were joking with her. And she wasn't like easily passing. I mean, you could very much tell she was trans. And nobody cared. And I went, this is the world I want for my youngest to grow up in. And if I could find that at a random Dunkin' Donuts in rural Tennessee, guess what? How many other scary, fearful things am I putting on the world that isn't true? And when you put out love, you get it. You know, I remember my first experiment not long after I started channeling and awakening started. I was walking through Wegmans, which I don't even know if you guys have here, but it's a supermarket. And there was an old guy who looked like he hadn't smiled in the last 50 years. I mean, it's just, his face was formed in a... So I smiled at him. And he genuinely smiled back. Like you could see it in his eyes, everything. And I went, I bet it's like that because nobody puts smiles out at him. We assume. And putting that on there, again, people assume with you as well. Which is why you need to speak up. Find your voice. Establish your boundaries. What you'll put up with, what you won't. What's going to happen if they cross those boundaries? And as a reminder, because again, I've seen this, when you first start to get boundaries, you get empowered. And empowerment is great, but not if you're trampling other people. You can't control someone else's actions. You can only control your own and how you will respond if they act in a way that crosses your boundary. Not even sure the next part of this because I channel it, so I let it all flow through. But actually, let me see what time we're at. Good. I will actually start to open it up to questions because there's a few of us and that usually gets a lot more going. Are there any questions? Guys, you're not helping full time.
Comment.
Oh, I like comments.
I want to talk to you after because you
Sure.
basically just said my whole life. I'm currently on that trajectory with establishing boundaries with someone that I love dearly. And
Right.
everything you're saying resonates, and I'm already been through several years of shadow work.
Shadow work is the key.
Yeah,
It really is.
the marriage, the whole
Yeah.
life, the 15
Yes.
years and that. And it's just wonderful when you can come to that realization that every relationship, every connection in our lives is meant to teach us something about us. And it is a lot to forgive some of the stuff with the ex-husband.
Right.
But this goes even with my parents and father.
Same.
It really is amazing, but it's not easy work, and I just really am glad I'm here. I was supposed to be in this room because you're exactly what I'm trying to want to share, and I think it's just by going through these experiences, that's how you can really tap into where people are.
I'm going to share with you actually, although it's not really connected to my shadow work class, something I think will help you is both the story with my father and my ex. My father sexually abused me when I was in 4th grade. I am actually completely okay with it because I did the shadow work and I cleared it. But the most important was I forgave him, not to his face. You never have to go to the person that hurt you. You just have to be okay with yourself. And then with the ex, I did the same thing, except in his case, I'm still in contact with him. We have children together. And what happened was while going through my shadow work, went, I needed to be the victim. And because I had created a victim paradigm for myself, I needed a bad guy. You know what? I release you from being my bad guy. I learned to speak up for myself. I left. I learned to take care of myself. I mean, I left disabled with 2 children that are on the Asperger's, autism spectrum. And I did it because I learned the lessons I needed to from having the villain in my life. So I don't need you to do it anymore. And I am not exaggerating to say it was no more than 48 hours later. He's telling me he reached out to apologize. He's been going to therapy. Not like most people get these stereo, we build what we think we want. And I didn't want, so I didn't project this, but I've seen it many times in relationships. It wasn't that he was trying to get back with me. I think he genuinely had started to heal. And I do feel that's because I released him from needing to have that role in my life. And I don't know if that will help you in your situation, but I hope it can. I know what the journey's like, and it's sometimes like getting hit by a hurricane. It's not going to hurt you, but at the time, it feels like you're being swept off your feet, rudderless, you don't know where to go next. If you sit in that silence, you'll hear where to go next. It always does answer. And yes?
How's it going with your 19-year-old? I have a 19-year-old also whose
Yes.
unhappiness I could not tolerate. And now I've created this. So I just wonder how it's going with you.
How it is
If you have
going,
tips that might help me.
We have just started to establish these boundaries. It was only like 3 weeks ago or so when I went to do the show in Chicago that the codependency part came through, and I realized how I was stunning my own children's growth by just wanting to keep them happy. Better. He, with the Asperger's, has a lot of fear of
Mine
doing
also
something
has
wrong.
that, yeah.
And so right now we're trying to get him where he can get a job. And it is a slow, steady progress because we are turning off the internet until he does. That was a very hard thing for me to have a boundary that I knew would make him that kind of unhappy. But despite the challenges and the things that were holding him down, he's doing it. He's put in multiple applications now, and that's part of why I know that once you can let go of the codependency part, set firm boundaries that you know are helpful for them to grow, it really is in their own best interest. And that was very affirming for me because I will tell you, a week or 2 ago when we were deciding we were going to set these boundaries, my insides felt like, they had gone through a Cuisinart because I identified as just mom for the last 20 years. And to be able to go, I'm a lot more than just mom. And now, in the role of mom, I still have to be mom without falling into only being mom, only caring about his happiness. I care about his long-term happiness. But I was putting his short-term okay for now so there wasn't conflict in the way of his actual growth and what he's going to need in order to blossom. So setting the firm boundary against every fiber of my being that struggled with this empathic piece has turned out beyond my expectations. He's put in a handful of applications and it's only been a few days. So So it is getting there. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit more about shadow work?
I sure can. And also, by the way, I have a class on YouTube, so if you want, I can give you how to find that, which is the one I do. But shadow work, I'm going to add in here how to do that in the quick version. You look for an emotional flag. You look for the point in which you are emotionally reacting in a strong way to something. And then look at it honestly. Am I overreacting, or was that a sensible reaction? The example I use in my class usually is, say some guy cuts you out in traffic and you are like, I want him dead. That might be a slightly excessive reaction to someone cutting you out in traffic. But the way this works for shadow is then you get to look and say, why did I react so angrily to some guy just changing lanes, even if he did so carelessly? Well, maybe you were supposed to be your high school quarterback, and you thought your entire life was ruined because you had dreams you were going to go to the NFL, and that car accident stopped you from becoming that quarterback. Well, now that you've identified where this trauma was in your life, you can say, let me look at this logically. What were the chances I was really going to get signed by the NFL? Probably not very high. I mean, it's possible, but probably not very high. Then look at what you actually did. Maybe you have a wonderful family and 2 beautiful children, and you went on to become an engineer, and you would have never done any of those things potentially had you become the high school quarterback and been chasing the dream at the time. Well, that car accident, you can now look back and go, nothing was taken from me, because I am exactly where I'm meant to be, which we always are, by the way. We are always where we are supposed to be at that time in our growth, because everyone makes it. I know this sounds like pie in the sky optimistic, but every single one of us has healed and ascended at the end, because that's how this works. And then the story's written backwards for us to watch. How did we get there? So you need every one of the things that you see as a negative in your life is to teach you something and help you come into your true self. And so the way you do the shadow work is look for that flag. Why do I have that flag? And then let it go. And one of the ways to let it go is that mirror trick, because you start to go, it isn't someone outside. It's always yourself. I am not happy because of this. I feel victimized is a huge one because of this. And because our whole society teaches us, is it fair or not? But there is really no fairness, because it's everybody's perspective. I realized if I tried to figure what anyone, even my children, even my partner, like the people I'm closest to in my life, if I try to see what I think they're perceiving, I will always be wrong. Now, as an empath, we know what they're feeling in their heart, but it usually doesn't match what's coming out of their mouth. Nor is it what comes out of our mouth, because we are always policing what we say because we want to make sure it's received right. If we're true and honest, then that no longer becomes a factor. And I do feel eventually we all get to that point where it's not a bunch of people with dirty lenses and agendas. It's a bunch of us that want to heal. And we will work together to make a better world where, as I said, as you can let go of the fear paradigm, the victim paradigm, fairness, which is part of the victim, they're connected. As you learn to let those go, those shadows heal. Now you'll know, especially early on in your shadow work, when you hit one of those core things that shaped your entire life, because you will cry the most beautiful tears. That sounds paradoxical, but tears are actually a beautiful thing, because it's an emotional purge of you letting go of something. Now, if you're crying and you don't know why, you can't look at it. So you have to look, why am I crying? But once you can see it, work through it and let it go, there is honestly, I don't think anything that feels better than knowing something is gone because you felt it release. There is something that is as good, and that's the universe will bring it back to you one more time, where you have to face it. And when you face it and realize, I'm not being triggered, you know you're afraid, and that is an absolutely fantastic feeling. Because triggers are there to show us the flags. You know, we go through a lot of pop psychology, avoid your triggers. Don't avoid your triggers, run into them head on. Because that's where you're gonna find those flags and what you need to heal. I personally love, and this is, I hear a lot in the community, a lot of friends that are afraid of Mercury retrograde. I love it. I love the new moon in Scorpio because the shadow work heals you and physically heals you. Because the way I cured for my things was letting go of the shadows that were all about how I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. This person's mad at me. That person's mad at me. This is how I messed up. And I internalized it all. Well, most of my medical problems were autoimmunes, which literally is your body beating itself up. And so that's exactly what I was doing. So as you clear your shadows, you end up clearing the ability to let yourself heal. It's the holistic body. If you get out of its way, you can heal yourself of anything. And I truly believe literally anything. I know people who have cured stage 4 cancer. As I said, I cured MS in myself. My lesions are gone. And so I really do believe anything is curable through shadow work. Is that all? Okay. Any other questions? I don't want to make this the shortest class ever. What time are we at? It's going to be funny on this video as I'm looking on. Okay. We still have 25 minutes, so I'm going. Okay. This ties in with both the codependency and the shadow work. I had already mentioned the mirror trick. But you can also look in how we project out onto other people. We do not see anybody the same way that they see themselves. I heard Naomi Campbell, top model, suffers from eating disorders and a huge issue with her body. We're talking one of the top models. She doesn't see what everybody else sees. And we do that to ourselves all the time. And then we don't forgive ourselves, which is where it ties into the shadow work. When you find your triggers, when you find your traumas, then forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now. A great exercise to find your shadows even is think back. If I could redo my life over, what would I do differently? Well, that's one of your shadows. You know how? Because you wouldn't want to change it if you were okay with it. So you look, what would I do differently? And then this is how I would do that if me now stepped into that time. And then forgive little you for having done it. Because you always are doing the absolute best you can. Now, we beat ourselves up. I was too stupid. I, should have known better. I lost my temper. And we beat ourselves up for it. But you know what? You did exactly the best you could in that situation. Example I used in my last class, and I think it's good for this, is lazy is a big one. We call ourselves lazy all the time. Guess what? Nobody, and that includes the people that you may think in your life are being lazy, are ever lazy. Because if this thing gave you passion, excitement, you'd get up and do it. It's not. If you are still not getting up to do it despite knowing it needs to be done, are you tired? Are you giving self-care and taking care of yourself? Because we would never do less for ourselves than the best if we truly could, if we had free choice. We don't have free choice because those traumas, those fears that stop us from acting hold us back. Once you can clear those, you do have free choice. You do heal, and you realize you were never being lazy in the first place. You were doing what you needed to be able to heal, to be able to rest, whatever your particular thing is. And then get all that negative self-talk out of there, because that's what holds us back. We are all, again, fully enlightened beings if we could just remember. And the way we remember is taking all of that self-flagellation out of the equation. Because if it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, and by the way, it doesn't, it only matters how you feel and how you think. Because when you are healing, you won't use that negatively. If you think you'll use that negatively, that shadows you're working through. Why do I think I'm a bad person that's going to take advantage of this if I'm walking around doing what's best for me? Because when you're healed, you're not going to go around hurting other people on purpose. But we render ourselves paralyzed by fear that someone's gonna see us that way until we get to let go and decide that's not what we're doing. So, any other questions? I'm just trying to fill it. No? I guess I'm gonna have to let you go early because I don't have anything else. Oh, yes, there you go. You saved my day.
Oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe you've already said this, but I feel like I'm definitely in the cycle of, I call it compromising. I feel like I'm always the one compromising in most of my relationships to keep everybody else happy.
Yes,
But-
that is a classic codependency. Yeah.
I mean, I hear everything you're saying, it pretty much describes me, but,
Yeah.
so
How do you
I'm
stop?
recognizing it, yes, I don't know how to stop, like,
Boundaries. Start small because it is an overwhelming practice. Because when you first start setting up boundaries when you've been codependent, you feel like you're way overreaching. You're being way too selfish and way too greedy. Guess what? You're not. But it looks that way because you're so far on this side of making everyone else happy. And start deciding what you're not going to put up with. And then speak it, which is the hard part. People who benefited from you having boundaries are not going to be happy at first. And that's hard when a lack of harmony is the most aberrant thing to you when you're empathetic. You just want everybody else to be happy and you're willing to sacrifice yourself for it. Guess what? You're the goddess. If you sacrifice yourself for it, nobody else is going to heal in your universe. You need to set those boundaries and get back to yourself and actually figure out who you are when you take them out of the equation. And I'm not saying take the other people out of your life, but start to figure out what you actually want from your life without taking them into account first. Then, after you figure that out, see where they fit in it with what you're willing to take or not. Because there are going to be some people who are going to say, no, I'm not going to listen to your boundaries, and then you have to stick to your repercussions for the boundaries. But the amount of healing you gain from not giving away so much of yourself is life-changing. It has healed my life. As I said, I'm giving my son the ability to grow into a productive adult. Now, I'm sure in his own experience of his universe, he will, like all of us, end up exactly where he needs to be. But from my perspective, I was stunning his growth. You know, by doing everything, by not wanting him to be upset, by giving in all the time. And now, by having boundaries, he gets to heal too. So the people you think will be upset by you setting boundaries will seem so outwardly at first, particularly because they need to challenge that so you can get secure in it. It's kind of how it works. If they folded super easy, you would never learn your lesson. We have to learn to keep speaking our truth. But by keep speaking our truth, they will heal and either not be in your life anymore, which can be a difficult thing, but actually more likely they will rise to the challenge. Once you're okay with it, they will step up and listen to your boundaries, particularly if you follow the thing of not making the boundaries you're not allowed to do that, and then don't put a repercussion you're not willing to follow. You know, if you don't put your dishes in the sink after dinner, if you say, I'm going to leave you, that's unlikely. But if you say, if you don't put your dishes in the sink after dinner, I'm not cooking dinner for you anymore. That is a boundary. And then follow through with it. And they'll get in line or they won't. And if they won't, that's because they have their own healing that they need to do. I got the notice, though, that our time is up, so I guess I didn't need to fill as much as I thought. But if anybody needs to, has any questions or wants to talk about any of it, I'm in booth 806. There's a lot of booths here, by the way. This is a huge one. Thank you, everybody.